Today I'm going to talk about mental health. Mental health is one of the most discussed issues in the society. It's a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also determines how we deal with stress and make choices. Mental health is critical in every stage of life, from childhood to adulthood. People who battle with mental illness can suffer from disorders such as depression, anxiety, and OCD. Mental health is highly valued in the modern society. Mental disorders such as anxiety and depression have become more and more common due to the development of the world, increasing the stress that people bear. Mental issues are more common in the Indigenous community. Suicide rates among Aboriginal Canadians are much higher than the non-Aboriginal population. According to Health Canada, the suicide rate for First Nation male from 15 to 24 is around 13%, comparing to the 2.4% for non-Indigenous male youth. For First Nation females, the suicide rate is around 3.5%. while it's only 0.5% for non-Indigenous females. And more than 1 in 5 Aboriginal Canadians have ever had suicidal thoughts. These numbers are still increasing since the statistics were released back in 2010. There are multiple factors for the issue which I'll be discussing in this video. First and foremost, the Canadian government has been suppressing the Aboriginals. In 1876, Canada introduced the Indian Act, which imposed government control over First Nations. The act included the creation of residential schools. Residential schools were government-sponsored religious schools established to assimilate Indigenous children into Euro-Canadian culture. However, most parents didn't know what was happening inside the schools. Native children were forced to attend residential schools. They were not allowed to speak their own language and practice their own culture. If they violate the rules, they will be treated terribly. This is often referred as cultural genocide. Many students were beaten, humiliated, and raped, which scarred them for life. Many survivors suffered from PTSD due to the terrible memories at school. The first residential schools in Canada opened in the 1840s, and the last one was closed in 1996, which was only 20 years ago. Over the years, around 115,000 children attended residential schools, and over 50,000 of them died. The case of Chani Wenjack is often mentioned when talking about residential schools. Chani was an Ojibwe teenager who attempted to run away from his residential school and died during his journey. The album Secret Path by Canadian singer Gord Downie was inspired by Chani Wenjack's case. In the song The Stranger, he sings, "I am the stranger. You can't see me. I am the stranger. Do you know what I mean?" When students left residential schools, they felt like strangers in their own communities because they've lost all their culture in the residential school. The line, "Do you know what I mean?" indicates that some of them could not communicate with the people in their community because they no longer spoke their native language. Another factor is racism. Racism means the prejudice and discrimination directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own is superior. Aboriginal people have been fighting against racism for years. Nowadays, residential schools no longer exist. Many Aboriginal families send their children to private schools to pursue a better education. However, a lot of Aboriginal students find it challenging to attend a Western school. The book Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie described a story about an Aboriginal teenager named Junior, leaving the reserve and going to an all-white school. He faced a lot of challenges and was able to overcome them at the end. One of the biggest challenges he faced was racism. he will get picked on by older schoolmates because of his identity. For example, on page 64, Roger, who was a senior student, made a racist remark on Junior. Scenarios like this happen in real life. 1 in 6 Indigenous students claim that they have been verbally or physically mistreated because of their race. Gord Downey expressed similar feelings in his song. In The Stranger, he sings, "This is not my dad. My dad is not a wild man. Doesn't even drink." Alcoholism is a big issue in the Indigenous community. Around 75% of all reserve residents feel that alcohol is a problem in the Indigenous community. Many people use alcohol to cope with their mental issues, which created the common stereotype that all of them are alcoholics that led to racial profiling and created a cycle. The use of alcohol was also mentioned a lot in Ab's lecture diary. For example, on page 70, Junior introduces Eugene, a family friend who is alcoholic and later died in a boat because of alcohol. So, what can we do to help the mental health issue in the Aboriginal community? As Appleby students, we learn about it in class. It's important for us to pay attention and understand these issues at a young age. I also think that the Canadian government isn't doing enough to take care of Aboriginal people. Although they have shut down and apologized for residential schools, there are still unfair policies. For example, the CFS care. It's meant to help Aboriginal kids to be raised in a better family, but some people criticize it as a new form of residential schools. Kids are taken away at a young age and being raised without a proper home. The Urban Res documentary showed that there are children being raised in hotel rooms, including the well-known case of Tina Fontaine, a girl under CFS care that got murdered after leaving her foster home. The Canadian government should realize the importance of the issue and create more realistic policies. Thank you for listening.